Tom, let me start with this. I think we just had this on the news again a minute ago. So the situation now, the provincial government, Francois Legault, is going to apparently meet with, or is going to ask to meet with Justin Trudeau to try to get, I guess, him, first of all, to maybe consider spending $1 billion to help defray the cost for asylum seekers here. And then this issue over daycare workers. So I want to make sure I got this right. So the Quebec Court of Appeal already has ruled that people who come here as asylum seekers have the right to send their children to public daycare. The province is saying, the premier is saying, no, they want to go to the Supreme Court of Canada to challenge that decision. How much of that do I have right?
Well, you've got it right. So let's start with the second part, okay? It was an unbelievable situation today in question period in Quebec City. Francois Legault stood up in the Blue Room and he said this. And he berated the opposition Liberals, and he said, how dare you suggest we listen to what Quebec's highest court says because those judges are named by Ottawa? You just heard that right. I never, ever, ever thought I would hear that from anybody in politics, even the most obscure backbencher from the smallest riding. But to hear the premier of one of Canada's largest provinces say that you can't really trust your province's own highest court because they are federal nominations. And of course, the great irony here is that he wants to appeal their decision to a bench of 9 judges named by Ottawa. So it's clearly a stalling tactic. And I hope that the Supreme Court makes short work of it, because the Supreme Court doesn't even have to give reasons. They just bring them forward. You have a very short period of time to file your appeal. They bring them forward, they hear them, and then they anonymously issue a ruling that they won't hear the appeal. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they won't hear this appeal, despite the fact that it's an important issue for First Nations. I do think that it's such a clear, for people who are coming here from other countries, it's such a clear stalling tactic, and we've seen this before by the CAQ. It's really unfortunate, and I can't believe that we're seeing this. So what the ruling was as follows. It said that the rule that was brought in, and it was a rule brought in by the Liberals, by the way. This was Couillard's government who brought in a rule saying if you're an asylum seeker, you do not have access to our inexpensive childcare system. You're not eligible. Okay, that's one thing. Then the courts get hold of it and they say it's illegal. You can't do that. This is discrimination. Fine. So you stand up and you say, okay, well, we'll deal with it. What we're also learning from the newspaper reports is that these people are actually not finding places in the public child care system. They're being excluded from it despite the ruling. So it's a damning situation for the province of Quebec to be in, to be saying no to a decision by its highest court, to being saying no to people who under international law we have an obligation to take care of and not discriminate against. And those families are now looking at private childcare, $50-$60 a day for them to be able to work, the ones who are lucky enough to have ever gotten a working permit from the feds. So I've never seen anything bogged down quite this badly. It's an embarrassing situation, but the worst part, of course, is to have the premier of the province of Quebec standing up and saying, I won't stand to have these federally appointed judges who just happen to be Quebec's highest court.
Wow. I mean, it kind of does boggle the mind, and I've seen some of the reaction from the opposition, which has been pretty harsh as well, not surprisingly.
Well, yeah, the Liberals actually did very well on this today. Their spokesperson on justice issues, posted something on X, walking in the corridors just outside the Blue Room, basically saying, I can't believe what
I just heard,
there.
right.
And you know what? For once, it's not exaggerated.
So let me move from that on to this other issue about getting all this money, this $1 billion to deal with asylum seekers. I thought I heard Justin Trudeau yesterday say that there would be money coming. Did I dream that?
No, they had already said there was $100 million coming, and that was something that Mark Miller had announced. Pablo Rodriguez yesterday, I think, had a pretty decent line saying, come on, back off. Let's sit down at the bargaining table and look at what's actually there, what you're actually spending, and then we'll talk about it, but we're not going to do this through press conferences. This was a clear move by Legault to take a lot of pressure off him because he had had a bizarre press conference on the weekend where he essentially blamed teachers for the deficit. Oh, it's not our fault that we're going to have this big deficit in the upcoming budget. It's because we had to give a bunch of money to the teachers. Sorry, Mr. Legault, you didn't know that you had a big negotiation with all of these teachers coming up and that you had to settle with them and then it was going to cost a lot of money. You had no idea about that. That's the type of management you've got. So this is where we are again with Francois Legault. He's lost right now. The type of things that I just described, his weekend press conference where he was lost, his statement today in the House was unbelievable. And so we're dealing with a premier who really doesn't seem to have a firm grip on things right now.
Last thing today concerns the Northvolt situation, which is not going away. I don't know if you heard our clip earlier on, but So yesterday morning, I corrected myself, not today, yesterday morning, he shows up for a presser and he's holding an apple, an orange, and a
Yeah.
banana.
Yeah.
That sounds like the punchline to a joke, but it's
Yes.
not. It's him actually answering the question on Northvolt, which is how did this thing get managed to go forward when a residential development that had been planned for the same area, which
Right.
would have housed perhaps thousands of people, didn't. This hole seems to be getting deeper, Tom.
It is. And I think that the whole housing argument is a bit of a distraction, but it does prove one thing, that the government was willing to push everybody else aside to hold on to these lands for Northvolt. So the fix was in for Northvolt. There's already ample evidence that they had been lobbying, and what were they lobbying for? It wasn't necessarily the question of the housing. That was the Quebec government putting together a parcel of land that was going to be big enough. What they were lobbying for was to make sure that the Bureau d'Audience Publique sur l'Environnement, so what we call the BAP. So this is the Quebec Public Hearing Board on Environmental Matters. They did not want to go through that process. So what did they do? They changed a rule. They rejigged one of the rules. There was a rule that said if you're making cathodes and you're producing more than 50,000 tons a year, you have to have a full hearing by the BAP on the whole project. They changed that 50,000 limit to 60,000. Why? Because this project is going to be producing 56,000. So this is a clear case of what we call, there's actually a term for this. It's called regulatory capture, where the entity that's supposed to be regulated by the government turns around and actually winds up being the boss of the government and dictating their own terms. And it's unseemly. In a free and democratic society, the government sets the rules to protect public health, to protect the environment. And so they've been using every argument in the book. We had the apple and orange from Legault yesterday. At the same time, we had this strange image from Fitzgibbon saying, well, this is not the Garden of Eden. I don't know anybody who said that it was the Garden of Eden, but I also know that Fitzgibbon is the one that they were approaching to try to get this changed. And I think that Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois had the best line today, Aaron. He said, you know what? The biggest enemy of the Northvolt project is Pierre Fitzgibbon, because by trying to pull this sort of little stunt, you change the rules and you tell everybody to take a hike and you try to distract talking about housing and you change the subject. Everybody knows that this thing should have been studied by the BAP. They've been fiddling around for 6 months. If instead of fiddling around for 6 months, they had held the public hearings, the thing could probably go forward. Now, I want to be clear. I'm not opposed to the project because I don't know enough about it to be opposed or to be in favor. Mm-hmm. Nobody does because it's never been studied objectively. What we're getting are the two local mayors holding press conferences yesterday saying, great project, nothing to see here, move along. The CAQ, that's already approved the thing, saying, nothing to see here, move along, we're not going to be studying this thing. And you've got environmental groups and a group of really serious, seasoned environmental lawyers saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take this thing to court because you've broken the rules and you've changed the rules and it was rejigged and you didn't consult the public properly. And I'm not counting out that they might eventually win. It's a very tough road to hoe, but it just shows that the CAQ doesn't know how to do things. There's a way to do something. One of them is to get the public on side. And once you've got social acceptability, then you can move forward. Once you've lost social acceptability, it's almost impossible to regain it because people don't trust you anymore. And that's the stage that we're at right now with Legault and especially Fitzgibbon. Nobody trusts them on the Northvolt plan.
I would ask this question, though. If that's the case and this goes forward and there is even a chance to win, doesn't Northvolt sit back at one point and say, hey, you know what? This is not worth the trouble. You're not the only place that wants us to build a plant, and we know that to be the case. They're already building in other places, and just simply walks away.
Yeah, there's a slight problem is that they've already signed a deal that they've announced, and that's why Legault and Fitzgibbon are holding on by their fingernails to what they've already done in the way of changes. But what it does is it puts a big light on this massive play by the CAQ government to simply not tell the truth to the public. I mean, they tried to slip this one by. It's like a magician. The whole bit yesterday about apples and oranges, you know, the magician waving his left hand over here so you're not paying attention to what he's doing with his right hand. He's talking about apples and oranges, and he's talking about, you know, residential project not going through and stuff like that. That's not the issue. The issue is that it's never been studied. And so even though I'm very amenable, I'm open to the idea of Quebec becoming a real player in the whole field of the batteries for electric vehicles. I think it's a good play. It does participate in the transition for the future, but don't tell me that we're not allowed to look at the ecosystems, that we're not allowed to look at biodiversity, we're not allowed to look at what the effect is going to be on the whole area, especially the wetlands. That is exactly why we created the BAP 45 years ago. It's been successful. Why are you trying to slip this one by without a full analysis? That's what the public is asking now, Aaron.
Tom, 30 seconds real quick. I asked listeners today, based on a Toronto Star headline that said nobody wants to have a beer with Justin Trudeau, who would you like to have a beer or coffee with? Federal, provincial, municipal politician. Your name, by the way, came up at least 3 times, which is impressive, including the one that says Tom Mulcair. He's simply brilliant. Also, I want to see how much beer his beard can hold. But that aside, Tom, if you could sit down with anybody, who would it be?
Wab Kinew, the newly minted Premier of Manitoba. I've had a chance to meet him in the past. Very nice guy, very genial, and I'd love to know what he's doing for his province on a whole bunch of levels, especially the environment and social issues.
He got a vote too, by the way. We actually took a call for him.
He's a great guy.
Yeah. Tom, thank you so much.
Talk to you soon.
Have a good one. We'll see you again next week.